For the Life of the World is a production of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. Visit us online at faith.yale.edu.
I observe in my own life a lot of religious people I know are completely wonderful, and a lot of religious people I know are complete schmucks. And a lot of atheists are wonderful, and a lot of atheists are schmucks. And it's harder than it should be to draw the line. And so if you have no consciousness of any transcendent realm, do you think you're at a disadvantage in leading a flourishing life?
I hope I'm not converting people to pluralism, right? Pluralism, qua pluralism, right? I don't think that would be the right way. I think we live in a situation of contending particular universalisms. And my sense of myself is that I am a member of one of these contending particular universalisms, right? I think we have a challenge of how to make fruitful for our lives together just such inhabiting of particular religious or secular traditions in a way that can make for peace of living together and contribute to something robust discussion, and therefore improve the relations enrich the tradition.
This is For the Life of the World, a podcast about seeking and living a life worthy of our humanity. I'm Evan Rosa with the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. What is the shape of a flourishing human life? Once upon a time, this question came pre-answered by either your culture or your tribe, by religion or philosophy, by tradition or way of life. But these days, given our increasingly individualized world and its emphasis on autonomy and self-expression, given the breakdown of social trust and the increasing degree of polarization and suspicion of the other, we have to ask and answer these questions for ourselves. What is the good life? What does it mean to live a flourishing life, and how can we actually do it? How can we actually be it? These are difficult questions on their own. They require intellectual muscles we've long let atrophy. They require reading deeply and at length. They require a willingness to listen across the chasm of disagreement. But one begins to wonder, if each of us must answer these questions for ourselves, how do we even begin to have this conversation together? The fact is, we need one another, not just to answer them well, but to ask them well. For the coming 2 weeks, we'll be airing a 2016 conversation between the New York Times columnist David Brooks and theologian Miroslav Volf. In this first part of the dialogue, David interviews Miroslav about his book, Flourishing, Why We Need Religion in a Globalized World. And in next week's follow-up, Miroslav asks David about his book, The Road to Character. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Welcome to today's debate on human flourishing. Miroslav is for it, I'm against it. I actually come from a series of institutions that have been hostile to U.S. flourishing for decades. The New York Times, where I'm the conservative columnist, a job I'm likened to being the chief rabbi in Mecca. And the University of Chicago, which has been hostile to my flourishing for 4 years. My favorite saying about Chicago is it's a Baptist school where atheist professors teach Jewish students St. Thomas Aquinas. Okay, so we'll start with a simple and obvious question. Your book is called Flourishing. What does it look like?
That's a great question to start. So I think of flourishing as having three formal components. One component is life is going well, for one. The other component is life is being led well. And the third one, in some sense, life feels also good. The first, life going well, describes the circumstances of our lives. We need to have a level of peace in social settings. We need to have our bodies nourished in certain ways for us to be able to say that we flourish. Second is life being led well. We need to act in ways that are appropriate. We need to have a form of character that is appropriate. And the third component, probably very popular these days in the wider culture, is life has to kind of feel good, feel right. And that can be, sometimes people think of it as kind of unimportant in some ways, but at the same time, without a sense of life feeling right, we cannot be said to flourish. In the biblical traditions, both Jewish and Christian, these are summed up in terms like peace for life going well, righteousness for life being led well, and joy for life feeling just right.
So as you're speaking, I'm thinking of Kanye West. He would say, my life is going well, I got a lot of money, my life is being led well, Taylor Swift hates me, and I'm certainly feeling good about myself. So that seems maybe not as tight a definition as one you would want.
Well, I think those are formal components of it, right? So everything depends not so much of all these three things being present, but everything depends, I think, on giving these components their the kind of robust character. If you think of it simply as our subjective understanding of it, you might feel okay for a while, and then you might not quite feel okay for a while. Flourishing, I think, is something also that extends over a period of time. Flourishing is something that characterizes our entire lives. And there are these rich traditions of thinking about what it means for circumstances to be right, what it means to inhabit, for instance, in just and peaceful social order. There's a whole tradition of thinking of what does righteousness actually mean? What does it mean acting rightly, so that it isn't simply kind of a subjectively felt action?
So for your flourishing, does it involve some eternal external standard?
I think it does. It does. I think that's really where the great traditions come, whether they're philosophical or whether they're religious traditions. They kind of map for us the account of who the self is, what the social relations are, and what the good is that we ought to aspire. And these traditions are almost like a kind of repositories of the standards by which we evaluate our lives. Mm-hmm. And obviously there are multiple traditions, and they sometimes conflict, and that's really what the course Life Worth Living is about. That's partly also what my book is about, is trying to figure out how among these major traditions that hold not just opinions of people, but affections of people and shape their practices, how we can engage in meaningful debate in the very much pluralistic world that globalization has created.
Right. But in the book, and even the title of the book, it's not just traditions you're talking about in the book. In the course, you've got secular traditions. In the title, you've got religion.
Yeah.
So the subtitle is Why We Need Religion in a Globalized World, which raises the question, why do we need religion in a globalized world?
He does raise that question, and hopefully the book provides certain answers for it. I think, so the purpose of the book, in that sense, generally when people think today of religion in a globalized world, what comes to mind immediately is the ways in which religions, I would put it, profoundly misfunction, in the ways in which religions are highly inimical to life, to flourishing life, and their whole set of precepts and practices and authorities are meant to kind of suppress life. Obviously, that happens as well. I try to look at religious tradition from the other end. There's this other side, they're highly ambiguous, ambivalent phenomena, but there's this other side of religions. And I think that great religious traditions are probably our most potent repositories of the visions of the good life, of the visions of flourishing life. And that's why I concentrate on them. My suggestion is not that there are not other alternatives to religions. Indeed, religions have been criticized even in their best form, and I think those criticisms are significant, ought to be taken into account. But religions bring something significant, and I think equally importantly, religions, in fact, are embraced by majority of the world population, and the world is becoming, for ill or for good, more of a religious place than it ever was, both in absolute and in relative terms. And so we have to take these accounts, work with them, and see in what ways they can be actually sources of significant wisdom for us.
So I'm a Yale undergrad. I'm being sucked inexorably to Goldman Sachs and into a world of the global economy and a certain value system.
Yeah.
What is a religion, pick any one or all of them in general, what is it offering me?
I think religion will offer you a sense that your life is not primarily about yourself, that you're going to Goldman Sachs or whatever other firm might be a good option for you, but you better think in what ways it will serve something larger than just your individual needs, in what ways it can be tied to a sense of solidarity at national level, but really also solidarity at the global level. It kind of frames, I think, your life by challenging you to ask, to what end am I working for Goldman Sachs? What are the purposes of my existence and therefore purposes of this particular activity that I undertake? I can be stellar at a variety of activities that I do, but what ends do they serve? And I think that's the fundamental religious question, in many ways, fundamental philosophical questions, purposes of human existence. This is what religions provide.
So what's equally as good as working at Goldman Sachs that religions can offer me? Well, what's the compelling counterculture? Like, what's the substance of that counterculture?
I think it will depend on individual callings that people might have, but I don't see any reason why washing the feet of the destitute and helping them raise their children, why digging wells in Africa, or you name a variety of things in which we engage our fellow human beings, the poorest of the poor, why that might not be as noble. Indeed, why that wouldn't be even more noble job than working for Goldman Sachs.
So you said religions make us think of a context bigger than themselves and serving the poor in Africa, but every U2 song does that. And so why do you need it seems to me, aren't you taking God out of the equation in the religious conversation?
No, I think there are multiple ways in which encouragements of this sort can take place. So the question might be: so what role does God play? I think we live in the kind of environment, and again, a variety of ways one can probably get at certain of the goals that I'm describing, but certainly in religious traditions. In the context, say, of market economy in which we find ourselves today, in which new consumer goods are created, the new desires are being generated, in which we seem to be running faster and faster to stay in the same place, a kind of sense of relativization of ordinary life's goods, at least as portrayed in these kinds of our economic imagination, is extraordinarily important thing. I think religious traditions take us out of ourselves, take us into something that is transcendent, and free us from being compelled to pursue new gadgets in order to satisfy the craving of the self.
Can you be good without God?
I think you can be good without God in this sense. I mean, I'm obviously a religious person. I'm a Christian. You can be good without believing in God, but that does not quite mean that you're good without God, right? If you are, as I do, if you believe that God created the world, that God created everything that is, indeed, that every breath of ours is dependent upon the existence of God, then you really can't be without God. But if you can be without God, you can be also good without God. So in a sense, the goodness, and if you postulate that God is a good God, goodness has its source, truth and beauty, and goodness have their source in God, and therefore whether you actually believe in God or not, you are good on the count of their being.
Right. But you know, the book is about the uses that religion serves in providing a counterculture to global capitalism, really. And so someone who's not conscious of any transcendence, I mean, I observe in my own life a lot of religious people I know are completely wonderful, and a lot of religious people I know are complete schmucks. And a lot of atheists are wonderful, and a lot of atheists are schmucks. And it's harder than it should be to draw the line. And so if you have no consciousness of any transcendent realm, do you think you're at a disadvantage in leading a flourishing life?
Well, I mean, depending on what you think about transcendent realm, right? There are these, as you say, a lot of religious people are complete schmucks. And a lot of religious people also, indeed, that's the pervasive propensity of religions, and that's why religions deserve a critique, is to kind of instrumentalize religions for goals that are extraneous to the original teachings of the religious tradition. And so religions become kind of prosperity religions. Religions become, quote unquote, political religions, in the sense that their entire purpose is there to stabilize kind of ordinary and secular order. In some ways, you can say this is an already first step at the secularization of religion, at undermining what religion indeed ought to be about. Unfortunately, it happens very often and to a large degree.
Yeah. Okay, I've been asking you a series of questions really at the personal level of how one's individual life is influenced by religion, or can be. But the book is mostly on the realm of systems, on the realm of the global the global world. Could you sort of step back and describe to us right now? Right now, the world seems to be being torn apart both by globalization and by religions. Would you say the order seems to be falling apart under both influences? I'm just really asking you to step back and describe the state of the world you describe in the book.
Yeah, in some ways, I feel that both the globalization processes and religions are really global phenomena. Indeed, I try to argue in the book that the world religions are some of the original globalizers. It's in world religions that human beings, qua human beings, are thematized, that universal ideologies are being articulated. So both of them are a global phenomena, and both of them, in some ways, are in a profound crisis. Religion certainly partly because they identify with particularist projects, they get embroiled in conflicts that exist between people as a result, partly of globalization processes. And so globalization, it seems to me, by bringing the world together, in some ways also accentuates the differences. Living in proximity becomes difficult for people, and religions participate just in those kinds of tensions.
Right. Let's start with the globalization piece. I remember in 1990 or so, after the Berlin Wall fell, I think I'm right in this, a guy named Kenichi Omai wrote a book called The Borderless World, or argued that borders were disappearing. There's another guy whose name I've forgotten, wrote a book called The World is Flat. And do you think global capitalism has not turned out to fulfill those hopeful expectations?
If those are hopeful expectations, it has turned out not to fulfill those hopeful expectations. And partly it hasn't fulfilled those hopeful expectations because it is increasingly not delivering, not simply not on the creation of wealth, but on the ability to distribute the wealth in any kind of a fair way. We see huge and immense discrepancies of wealth today, and I think they are some of the major causes of tension. They're the causes of tensions in my reading. I'm not an expert in this, but in my reading, there are causes of tensions in this country, but there are causes of even greater tensions globally.
And do you think they distort flourishing up and down, those inequalities? We're here at Yale, we're at a very unequal place.
I think they distort flourishing in significant ways. I think we cannot properly flourish ourselves when other people aren't flourishing. In some ways, I think of flourishing as not individual simply thing. It's a social flourishing. Flourishing of one person is tied to the flourishing of others, and therefore my flourishing is tied with the flourishing of the entire planet. And I think this kind of flourishing is being significantly eroded and in some places radically destroyed by the present form of capitalism.
Let me challenge you on that. The religion is based on love, as you write in here, and love is problematic because it's particular and it's preferential. And so when you start saying my flourishing depends on the flourishing of the whole world, it seems to me, aren't you watering it down and sort of having a vague global humanism and not any actual religion as we know it and see it?
I'm not sure. I think that global, at least the religions like Buddhism or Christianity or Islam, in certain respect, Judaism as well, the Judaism is a particular case. They are global religions. They address individual and address potentially every individual in the same way. Who's my neighbor was a classical question, and neighbor turns out not to be my co-religionist. Neighbor turns out to be a person who isn't my co-religionist. So kind of fundamental stance is actually to treat every human being as equal, whether one belongs to my group, in-group or out-group. And that, I think, is a very important dimension of the great religious traditions.
But would it be accurate to say that most religions of the world are turning more particularistic? In Judaism, the Orthodox flourishing over the conservative and the Reform, and Protestantism, obviously, at least for a while, evangelicals and Pentecostals flourishing over the mainstream. In Islam, it seems to be moving also in a more orthodox or even radical direction.
Well, I would distinguish moving in orthodox directions and being universalistic in a sense, right? Universalistic in the sense of treating all human beings as not distinguishing clearly in-group and out-group in the sense of responsibility that we have toward them. And there you have some very conservative religionists who would do just that because of the commitments that they have to their own faith. Think of Buddha, for instance. It seems to me that you can't be more specific in terms of Buddhism than who Buddha was, right? In terms of articulating the precepts of the religion. Nonetheless, it has had universalistic message in that sense for everyone and not just for the in-group.
And in general, what do you see trends in religion? I mean, obviously, the secularization that people expected has not happened. So what is the reality of just the evolution of religion in the globalized world?
If I see any trends, I see religion in some ways thriving, right? It doesn't mean that number of seculars isn't increasing. In fact, it is. I think the function of religion striving and secularism and since striving is a function of population growth. To significant degree. There are differences among religions in terms of conversationalist religions or simply population growth religions. But you do see growth, you do see political engagements. What I see actually happening, I think, is that increasingly religions are being pushed to become less political religions, but more, quote unquote, prosperity religions. So that their own religious teachings are functionalized with regard to individual, maybe communal, but primarily individual prosperity. The more religions are aligned with a kind of economic system, the more they become servants of that economic system. And I think, in some ways, in a different way than when they align themselves with political systems, betray their original original calling, which is not to say that religions ought not to be politically engaged or have nothing to say, contribute to the stability of economic system. But if you functionalize them with regard to political systems or economic systems, you fundamentally betrayed the character of religion.
Yeah, I mean, I gather you want them to be a counter pressure. And that,
I'm hopeful that they can be that. Sometimes I'm despairing a little bit.
Yeah. So in the 1950s, there was Reinhold Niebuhr, there was Martin Buber, there was Abraham Joshua Heschel, there was Martin Luther King in the 60s, a series of religious leaders and theologians who took a very active role in the public square, introducing concepts like sin and grace and redemption into public debate. Yeah. It seems to me that there are very few of such people around today. Theologians or clergy who are real public figures, public intellectuals, in the way Reinhold Niebuhr was. And this book is sort of an attempt to get back in that world. So first of all, why did those sort of secular sermons go away? And is this indeed an attempt to bring some of the religious thinking to public question?
Well, I think we find ourselves in a significantly different situation. We were, at the time of Niebuhr's, we were in a country that was, and indeed in a kind of, well, not just country, but the Western world, that was still, though nominally, culturally, to a significant degree Christian. When you have that kind of cultural environment, you can address with Christian conceptualities, you can introduce some of these concepts, and they will do some significant cultural work. As the culture becomes more pluralistic, you have less chance of doing this. And in a sense, in a different way, what I'm trying to do in this book is to kind of name a pluralistic context for us and to plead for the role of varieties of religions, including secularism, in the public sphere, bringing their visions of the good life. So what's similar that you have in all the traditions, the visions of a good life teased out across those traditions are being brought into public sphere. I think this can be done and ought to be done in a pluralistic way. And the argument of the book is that actually religious traditions have internal resources to approach the issue in just such pluralistic way.
Yeah. Well, this sort of brings us back to the course. Is the purpose of the course to present to students, there's a range of moral traditions. I'm at a secular university. I'm not going to tell you which one to believe in, but pick one? Or is it just, are you just trying to introduce students to moral categories, moral ecologies, different moral traditions?
No, actually, we're doing something different than either of these two options. It's not introducing simple students to options, and it's not certainly kind of advocating for one particular tradition. I think it's important to introduce these traditions not simply as the content, here's the tradition, now choose, but rather to have an interface between student and the tradition as a tradition that makes claim to truth and therefore also a claim on their lives. To, in a sense, figure out how might life look like if it was lived from that perspective. What if I take seriously those claims? Provisionally, I take them seriously, wrestle with them, and then I will have opportunity to reflect about my own life and to what extent that might or might not fit who I imagine myself to be.
So what would life be like if I really lived like Jesus, if I really lived like Buddha, if I really lived like Nietzsche?
Or something of the sort, right? So obviously we can't introduce students into the entirety of the religious tradition or into the entirety of the life of the great founder. But we ask certain forms of questions, which when it gets my turn to ask you, I will articulate so as to focus the discussion around the questions of the good life, and then ask students, given what they have read, try to imagine yourself what it would look like. Try to explore your own life around you and figure out whether that contributes somehow to you living more truthful life meaning fitting to what we know about the rest of the reality, more beautiful life, and a good life.
So are they meaner to each other on Nietzsche Week? Or
You know, it's very interesting. We tried to figure out, so what might it be to actually kind of engage in interchanges as Nietzsche might do, or what might actually. The interesting question was, so let's try not to imagine and think of Nietzsche simply as we know what the problem is with Nietzsche, will to power and stuff like that. We tried to ask students, now imagine that you took that on. What would be good about this? What kind of good is Nietzsche articulating, and how might it apply to the set of relationships in which you find yourself and the life you live? So in a sense, we want those traditions to become alive for them.
So let me come back to a theme which has undergirded a number of my questions, and that's about pluralism. You've been, even in the last half hour and in the book, extremely respectful of pluralism. And is there a danger that you're watering down the message? That, I mean, nobody goes to church on Sunday morning or synagogue or mosque to worship pluralism. They want the particular thing. And that in sort of stepping back and having a stepping back stance, that all religions offer different things, you're losing some of the focus maybe that you feel personally in your own faith, or that any Muslim would feel, or any Jew would feel, or any atheist would feel, that you're sort of making it more nebulous than it needs to be.
Well, I hope I'm not converting people to pluralism, right? Pluralism, qua pluralism, right? I don't think that would be the right way. I think we live in a situation of contending particular universalisms. Right? Those religious traditions and philosophical traditions, they are contending particular universalism. They're particular. And my sense of myself is that I am a member of one of these contending particular universalisms, right? I think we have a challenge of how to make fruitful for our lives together just such inhabiting of particular religious or secular traditions in a way that can make for peace of living together and contribute to something robust discussion, and therefore improve the relations enrich the traditions. Yeah. And I feel that when I have dialogue with my Muslim friends, or when I have dialogue with Martin Hägglund, who's sitting here, I don't feel like I need to sacrifice anything. I feel that I can be particular, and just as particular person engage in this debate. But you have to know, you're talking to a person who for an entire year, as a Christian, committed Christian, Christian theologian, what do you expect of me, had Nietzsche on his nightstand and read Nietzsche for devotions. And I was deeply enriched by that, because it was kind of extraordinary to interface this immensely smart and sensitive, even though in my perspective, majorly misguided intellectual with my own perspectives. It was wonderful. I became kind of a Nietzsche devotee in some ways. When I was teaching in my previous teaching position, I taught a course, Nietzsche for theologians, and for entire course, I made a stipulation that students cannot say one negative thing about Nietzsche. They need to think about what might be right about Nietzsche, which was very difficult for some of them.
So give us an example.
Of what might be right about Nietzsche?
Like, how does it help you as a Christian to read Nietzsche?
Well, I would just think of the critiques of just think of will to power, or think of the critiques of religion as kind of expressions of resentment. It's very easy to indicate how Nietzsche might be right, and how I might, as a Christian or as a religious person more generally, whether I'm Buddhist or Christian or Jew for that matter, how I might be enriched by reading Antichrist, right? By reading kind of this shrill critique, but immensely perceptive about discrepancies, about twists of my own religion, I think it's tremendously important. Yeah. And my sense is the first critics of religion, in many ways, certainly in the Hebrew Bible and in Christian Bible, prophets. They were relentless. And I think religions without prophetic critique of religion, they will do a lot of harm.
Yeah. I want to get to your epilogue, which is so wonderful. You quote Nietzsche and you talk about nihilism. And it might be useful to describe the forms of nihilism you see. The reason religion is necessary as an antidote is because of this. And it might be useful for you to describe those forms of nihilism you see particularly threatening and prevalent in the world.
Well, so one of the ways in which Nietzsche has a critique of religion is a form of nihilism. We always, religious people think of Nietzsche as being kind of nihilistic philosopher, and there's a certain sense in which he is, but he sees in religion something profoundly inimical to life and therefore nihilistic. Right? And so you can see some forms of fundamentalist religions that they're just like kind of claws coming from above and squelching anything that's underneath this thing. It's extraordinary. So you have this tender plant of life that's not nourished, but that kind of squeezed into molds, and obviously people rebelled. The famous three metamorphoses in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Camel that bears. That's your conservative, oppressive religion. Lion roars, rebels against that kind of religion, and then the next metamorphosis is a child. And in some ways, Nietzsche has this sense of the play, but play itself now, from my vantage point, end up being also a meaningless play, unbearable lightness of being. And I think we move between these kind of two nihilisms, and almost displayed at the world stage, kind of oppressive religious nihilism and nihilism of the kind of absence of meaning, nihilism of unbearable lightness of that which we do, something that profoundly attracts but is not significant in our lives.
And so globalization is encouraging that second form.
It's encouraging that second form, and it's encouraging then also reaction to that second form in form of oppressive religious tradition. So it's a flight from meaninglessness into crushing and oppressive meaning, and of course, flight from crushing and oppressive meaning back into the other one. So the pendulum kind of swings between these two. That's how it seems to me.
Which is actually what you see if you read about the suicide bombers or the guys who join ISIS. They were like bodybuilders just worshiping their body, and then they flip over and become ISIS members, back and forth. And then finally the sweet spot. So you've described these two nihilisms.
Yeah. And obviously the big question then becomes, is it possible somehow to combine the freedom and pleasure with the belief, robust belief in God? And my argument toward the end of the book, I give my own reading of things, is that properly understood, if you think of God as a creator, properly understood appreciation of the world as creation actually enhances the joy in the world, joy of the world itself, right? Rather than taking away from it. The famous critiques of how Dante, when he was led to behold God by Beatrice, suddenly leaves Beatrice and their love by the wayside in order to be completely immersed in the beauties of God. The world disappears and God is only the object of love. I think if you think of God as a creator, if you think of how we read creation, not simply as things or how we relate to things in the world, they're not things for us primarily. They are almost like relations. And I give example of my father's ink pen that he gave me. It's an object, but it isn't an object. When I touch it, it's infused with the presence of my father. And in some ways, that's how we religious people, properly who believe in God, relate to ordinary things in life. They aren't just things. They're infused by presence. They are sacraments of relationships. And in that sense, affirmation of God is affirmation and the joy and the goodness of the world.
So I've been admiring your silk handkerchief in your pocket. And how is that an affirmation of? It seems to me you're. I get what you're saying, but it seems to me you're asking too much of some of our everyday pleasures. So I read a book recently that said there are 4 levels of happiness. There's the just material gratification, very nice suit, nice handkerchief, nice car, that's fine, that yields happiness. Then there's ego comparative happiness, the pleasure we get being better than other people at things. Then there's generative happiness, the pleasure we get from giving back to each other. And then finally there's transcendence, some sense of one's place in a cosmic order. And it seems to me that we can have gradations of happiness, but we don't have to invest every Snickers bar in sort of in transcendence, which it seems to me maybe what you're doing, no?
Well, I think if I'm just investing it with transcendence, my investments are going to dissipate very quickly. So I think if there's anything, there is a kind of perception of the world as a gift, and obviously there are gradations of one perceived gradations of one's awareness, but that doesn't take away from the possibility of the intense pleasures that we have, seeing them as something imbued with more than just the thing itself and its particular relationship to me.
For the Life of the World is a production of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture at Yale Divinity School. This episode featured journalist David Brooks and theologian Miroslav Volf. Production assistance by Martin Chan and Nathan Jowers. I'm Evan Rosa, and I edited and produced the show. For more information, visit us online at faith.yale.edu. New episodes drop every Saturday, with the occasional midweek. If you're new to the show, we're so glad that you found us. Remember to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. And if you've been listening for a while, thank you, friends. If you're liking what you're hearing, I've got a request. Would you support us? It's pretty simple, really, and won't take much time. Here are some ideas. First, you could hit the share button for this episode in your app and send a text or email to a friend or share it to your social feed. Second, you could give us an honest rating on Apple Podcasts. How are we really doing? Finally, you could write a short review of the show in Apple Podcasts. Reviews are cool because they'll help like-minded people get an idea for what we're all about and what's most meaningful to you, our listeners. Thanks for listening today, friends. We'll be back with more this coming week.